A Chinese spy balloon sailing through Canadian airspace and over the U.S. Plus, under pressure, the Liberals change tactics on some really big issues. I'm Mercedes Stephenson. Welcome to the West Block. The U.S. ambassador weighs in on the diplomatic incident between the U.S. and China after a Chinese surveillance balloon was spotted floating over the U.S. last week.
They are a legitimate threat to the United States and Canada.
And the federal Justice Minister on bail for violent repeat offenders. Concerns about medical assistance in dying for the mentally ill, and a political climb down on gun legislation. Late last week, a Chinese surveillance balloon was spotted hovering over the United States. It also spent time in Canadian airspace. This incident has increased tensions between the U.S. and China, and of course, it has all of us thinking about North American defense and security, especially ahead of the president's visit next month. I am joined to talk about this by the United States Ambassador to Canada, David Cohen. It's always such a pleasure to see you, Ambassador.
Well, it's great to be with you. Great. This is my first visit in the studio, not my first visit with you, and it's great to be here.
Well, it's a first visit on a pretty exciting weekend with everything that's happening with this balloon. I know that you are briefed on intelligence and security. You're a close friend of the president. Canadians are looking at this, and they're concerned, and so are Americans. What can you tell us about the incident in terms of the significance that the Chinese are actually flying a balloon over North America with intelligence gathering capabilities?
So I think it's a reminder of the need for us to be vigilant, the need for us to fund an adequate defense, the need for us to have an adequate technological defense. I think it's a reminder of the importance of NORAD to continental defense for both Canada and the United States. On the other hand, let's not jump out of our shoes here. I mean, this is a balloon that was at very high altitude. My information is that there was never no American citizens or buildings were ever in jeopardy for this. The balloons were well above commercial airliner flight patterns. And this is not the first time that this type of a device has been floated over the United States. It has happened previously. I
think that part is remarkable. I just want you to kind of talk about that for a second, because people are saying, well, this is a sudden escalation, but it's just we haven't heard about this before.
I think that's right, that we just haven't heard about it before, but it's another reminder that when you're dealing with matters of sensitive foreign relations and sensitive intelligence matters, that's not a time where you really want your government to be fully transparent all the time. So I think what's important is, the way I look at this is, what's important is it was known to our military and intelligence sources. There was a capable, immediate assessment as to the risks and the dangers, and conclusions were reached. And I think in the tracking of the path, the position of the Pentagon is that, if necessary, if we became worried about what it is that could be observed through this balloon, we were prepared to ameliorate those risks. And we have to remember that where China is also, and Russia, they also have satellites. they have low altitude satellites that are constantly taking pictures of all of the United States and of all of Canada, for that matter.
Is this maybe more about China sending a message, we can do it if we want to, than what it's actually gathering in terms of intelligence? So
I hate to speculate what China's motivations will be. And you notice their public comment, of course, is that it's gathering weather data and it drifted off course. I'm not sure I believe that it's gathering weather data, but it's entirely possible that it drifted off course and that it was never any intention to have it flying over, this part of the United States. But I don't want to speculate about what China's up to. I'm happy to comment, though, that this really should be a reinforcement for all of us, for our public, that China is not a country to be trifled with. They are a legitimate threat to the United States and Canada from a military perspective, from a defense perspective, from an intelligence perspective, and from a trade perspective. And I think it underscores the reasons for sound and consistent policies by both Canada and the United States toward China. And it doesn't mean those policies are that we should shut down access of China to our markets, or we should wall off our countries to China. It is a reminder of the need to be vigilant, of the need to pay attention. And, I think the United States policy around China is sound, and it's a reminder of how sound it is. Invest in what we do well and position ourselves well, align ourselves with our allies, and in particular Canada, and then compete, with compete having the broadest possible definition. It's not just trade competition, but it's be prepared to push back against military incursions or intelligence incursions, push back against human rights violations, against non-market-based trade practices. And I think it's that integrated approach of working with China when we need to and when we should and where it benefits all of us, but being prepared to push back on China and to recognize that China to the United States, I'll say it this way, China is not Canada. I mean, China is a potential threat and needs to be watched all the time. And it is a different relationship between the United States and China than there is between the United States and Canada.
Do you think that Canada is tough enough policy-wise on China? Because there's been some questions about Chinese espionage here, attempts at Chinese interference in influencing our politics. Is the U.S. satisfied with the position the Canadian government's taking?
So I don't know how I would have answered that question a year ago based on information that I would have had then. But it's pretty easy for me to answer that question now, which is I think the United States is comfortable with where Canada is with China. Coincident with the release of the Indo-Pacific strategy, Canada had a lot to say about Canada. Canada had a lot to say about China and about its relationship with China. And I think we all heard tougher rhetoric, a greater sense of the threats that China play to Canada and to North America. And frankly, I think we heard an articulation of a policy that was very close to the policy that the United States has adopted vis-a-vis China. So right now, in my term as United States ambassador to Canada, I can't really point to anything that Canada has done that would not be completely consistent with what the United States would do and is doing in the same circumstance.
One last question. The president is visiting next month. What do you expect the focus of that visit's going to be?
So I'm happy we're to the point where you can actually say the president is visiting next month. We have a month where he'll be visiting. And I think, look, I think the themes of his visit will be to emphasize the importance of the U.S.-Canada relationship, the strength of that relationship. The president has previously said, and I hope we'll hear it again, that the United States has no better friend, partner, or ally in the world than Canada. And I think that will be one of the themes. I think another theme will be some of the critical places where we are working together around the energy transition and the environment and climate and the energy transition. I think there'll be conversation about some of the deliverables that were discussed in the North America Leaders Summit, where Canada and the United States are very aligned on future economic growth and very importantly on the type of growth. And to use Joe Biden's words, which I've heard Prime Minister Trudeau use as well. We want to build from the bottom up and from the middle out, not from the top down. And we want to have growth and recovery that benefits every segment of the economy, every segment of society, and everyone in the economy. And so that's such an important shared value, but it's such an important objective for both countries that I would expect that that would be one of the themes we'll hear about on the visit.
Well, and I'm sure there'll be some questions about trade in there as well, something we hope to talk to another time when we have not the situation that is currently unfolding, dominating our thoughts. Always a pleasure to speak to you, Ambassador. Thank you for coming.
Pleasure to speak with you, and I'm happy to come back at any time to talk about
I'm going to hold you to that.
Right.
Up next, the Justice Minister faces tough questions on bail reform, gun control, and medical assistance in dying. The premiers are urging the Liberal government to reverse Bill C-75, which they say made it easier for violent repeat offenders to get bail. Calls have grown louder following recent attacks on public transit and the killing of an OPP officer in late December. Opposition leader Pierre Poilievre introduced a motion to reverse the bill last week.
Conservatives are putting forward a motion in the House of Commons to reverse Trudeau's failed Liberal bail policy and ensure that repeat violent offenders stay behind bars rather than automatically being released.
Joining me now to talk about the state of Canada's justice system and bail is Justice Minister David Lametti. Minister, welcome. Nice to have you here.
Pleasure to be here.
Do you think that repeat violent offenders, not the first time, not non-violent offenses, but people who've been before the courts and been convicted on a number of charges, a number of times, that in some way related to a weapon or some kind of violence against another person, should be able to get bail the way they're getting it right now? Or do you think that that should be more restricted? And would you look at bringing in measures to ensure that if somebody is a repeat violent offender, they're not able to get out and commit more crimes while they're on bail?
Well, we will look at the system. There's no question to see if we can improve it. It is difficult already. There in at least one gun offense that I can think of, there is a reverse onus already, where you have a right to bail in Canada. It's a charter right. It's also an old common law right. So it's one of the oldest rights we have. You're innocent until proven guilty. That being said, you can only be denied bail if you pose a threat to society. In most cases, it's up to the Crown to show that the person will be a threat to society and therefore deny bail. We've reversed the onus in intimate partner violence, one gun offense that I know of, and repeat offenders, in theory, should be subject to that higher standard because they would possibly pose a threat to society. It's up to prosecutors to make those arguments in front of a judge. That being said, we've heard the cry from premiers. We have seen some tragic events, and our sympathies go out to the families of Constable Pershala and others who've been affected. And so we will do our best to see if there are other places that we can toughen the system up in a way that still complies with the Charter and the balances that we're trying to create as a result of the Charter. And we're open to working with the provinces to make sure also that the administration of justice at the provincial level, the administration of the bail system works.
But
the Conservatives failed to point out.
The federal justice minister, so you do have the power to make these changes. Are you willing to make it harder for repeat violent offenders like Miles Sanderson, like other offenders we've seen who have a long history? We're not talking about a first time.
Yes, willing to look at ways to make it tougher. What the Conservatives failed to point out in the case of Miles Sanderson, as well as the case in southwestern Ontario, that the person, in both cases, the person did have a bench warrant out for their arrest. They'd breached their bail conditions, and they were supposed to have been rearrested.
And that doesn't seem to be happening in a number of cases.
Well, and that's the administration of the bail system, which falls on the provinces, and I'm not blaming the provinces.
But if they weren't out in the first place, you wouldn't have to pick them up either.
Well, it's an ongoing system, right? And so there, again, the presumption is you get bail because it's a charter right, unless you are a threat to society, or it can be shown that you are, or your possibility,
But you think in the cases of like repeat violent offences, that goes towards the argument you might be a threat to society?
Well, it should be an argument that the Crown makes in these hearings. We will certainly look at ways to strengthen that.
Let's talk about guns. On Friday, your government announced that you were repealing this very controversial amendment to what was initially supposed to be about handguns. It got expanded to include long guns. Hunters were very upset. Your government defended the bill, said that wasn't the case. You weren't going after those guns. Now it seems you're recognizing maybe you were going after some guns you didn't intend to. What happened there?
Well, I think we listened and we heard. It was never our intention to go after hunting rifles. It was always our intention to go after handguns and assault rifles. And we heard a number of important voices in the community, particularly Police se souvient, who wanted a definition, an evergreen definition. And so we tried it. We didn't quite get it right. It had a little too much reach.
A little too broad.
And so we're pulling it and going back to the drawing board. Again,
is it going to come back as just handguns this time, the handgun amendment, or is it going to be broader but not include hunting rifles?
I'll leave that to Minister Mendicino to work out. He's going to go out and consult, I think, pretty intensively over coming weeks and months. We'll see where it lands. But it is our intention to keep Canadians safe. It is our intention to ban assault rifles. It is our intention to ban and buy back. It is our intention to ban handguns. We've already frozen to some extent the weapons that we can, but we want to enshrine this in law. And he's going to continue working on a definition after having consulted. But we heard people, and we heard people in rural Canada. We heard Indigenous voices, and we heard hunters saying, "You caught my weapon," and our response was sincere, which is we don't mean to catch legitimate hunting weapons.
It seemed like maybe it wasn't the best planned out before it was announced, but I do want to ask you.
It's actually quite, in fairness, it's actually quite a difficult exercise to create an evergreen definition.
I can imagine with a changing industry, but there is one other topic I'm hoping to touch on with you, and that's medical assistance in dying. Right. On Thursday, you announced that you're going to be pushing the deadline for mental health conditions being the reason why people are able to seek medical assistance in dying to March of 2024. It was supposed to kick in last month. There's been a lot of concern about this, a lot of concern that with mental health, it can be hard to tell if a person is in a state of mind to make that decision. That vulnerable people could use mental health because they're experiencing anxiety and depression from being unhoused or lacking the proper social supports. And that instead of receiving the social supports they need to get well or to keep them in housing or to make sure they're able to buy food, that they will seek MAID as an alternative, and these vulnerable people could be exploited. Do you think that mental health should still be a reason why people can seek MAID in Canada?
Well, let me state at the outset that those circumstances that you've just described do not render one eligible for MAID under the regime that's been elaborated by our expert panel.
Even if they go in and say, I'm experiencing severe anxiety and depression?
No, you should. If you're experiencing severe anxiety and depression, if you're having suicidal thoughts, you should see it. You should seek a doctor's help. You should seek help, friends, hotlines. Help is there. Those people are not eligible for MAID. The regime, and this is a bit of a misconception that's being...
people who are suicidal are not eligible
not at all.
For MAID?
These are, what you're looking at are disorders, mental illnesses that have been treated by experts over a long period of time, and where there's no possibility of improvement. This is not a case of suicide. This is an important piece of misinformation that is being frankly advanced by critics who don't want to see this part of the regime move forward, or indeed want us to back away from previous parts of the MAID regime. This is not meant to apply to people who are having suicidal thoughts. This is not meant for people.
But how can you guarantee that if depression is related to suicidal thoughts?
Well, in
some people, not in all.
The guidelines that have been elaborated by the expert committee. We've now got an extra year to make sure that those get out to universities teaching medicine, to practitioners, the various colleges, professional bodies across Canada will be able to internalize these guidelines and develop the tools so that this gets out to the profession. Those guidelines are quite severe. What we're talking about is a very tiny fraction of cases within another tiny fraction of cases, i.e. the non-end-of-life regime cases. Vast majority MAID cases are end-of-life. Cancer.
Well, so far, we haven't opened it to mental health yet, so we don't know those numbers.
What we have opened since 2021, a non-end-of-life regime with additional criteria and safeguards. And even then, we're now starting to get data based on the 2021 regime as of January, and getting better data is important, disaggregated data in particular. That data still shows that it's a tiny fraction. The numbers that I have seen, a tiny fraction of people who are non-end of life. And the mental health, people suffering from mental disorders, will be a tiny fraction of that tiny fraction.
But the Canadian Mental Health Association says that you can't determine whether or not mental health is ultimately curable.
I'll base my opinion on what Dr. Mona Gupta said, who chaired our committee, who's one of the leading experts in Canada. She said that the practitioners who are working with these kinds of patients are comfortable with the criteria as elaborated, and actually she feels they're ready to move forward now. What we're doing with this pause is giving everybody a chance to internalize these guidelines, and we want everybody to be on the same page. It allows us to combat some of the misinformation that's out there. But this won't open the floodgates. People suffering from mental illness are suffering. People suffering from mental disorders are suffering. And a number of them, we know, would like access to MAID because their suffering is incurable and intolerable. And so they should be in the same position as any other Canadian who is capable of making that decision.
Minister Lametti, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Up next, what I'll be watching next week, the Premier's head to Ottawa looking for a health care deal. Time for a little analysis on what I've got an eye on for this week. The Premiers will be here in Ottawa to ask for more money for health care. They want $28 billion, not pocket change. The Prime Minister clearly has an offer up his sleeve, and he said that there will be strings attached. Will the Premiers, especially from cash-strapped provinces, be in a position to say no to any deal? And how will the curveball of side deals with each province shape the political strategy in the meeting? The divide and conquer tactic with the provinces worked well for the Liberals on childcare, so we'll be looking for that. And of course, we'll also be keeping an eye out for further developments in the diplomatic tensions between the U.S. and China. I'm Mercedes Stephenson. Thanks for hanging out with us today, and we'll see you right back here next week.